Hey everybody, welcome to EMS Office Hours. I am Jim Hoffman, of course. Uh, I am joined today by Greg Friese. Greg, thanks for popping in with me today.
Yeah, happy to do it, Jim. It's been a long time since I
Yeah,
was
we
on a
haven't
EMS
done a
Office
little
Hours podcast.
haven't done a little collaboration in a while.
Yeah,
I don't know if
it's-
you want to just give a quick bio of yourself, just so anybody listening or watching doesn't really know who you are for some
sure.
ungodly reason. Um,
I do have a problem maybe being overexposed, but thanks for having me back on EMS Office Hours, Jim. So you and I maybe first connected ages ago when I was just in the 2000s, maybe
yeah,
writing articles for EMS1.com, but also I wrote for EMS World and I was presenting at conferences, and you and I collaborated on a couple different things through the years. And that writing for EMS1 about 8 years ago led me to become the first EMS1 editor in chief, which I did for several years, and then um, was, I guess, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, became the editorial director for a group of public safety websites. We're all part of Lexpol.
yeah.
Um, but Lexpol has these websites: police1.com, fire rescue one, EMS one, and corrections one. So I supervise the editors in chief of that group of sites, and they in turn um, associate editors and assistant editors. But I
Is
think
EMS grants part of that as well, or is that something different?
yeah. So Lexpol has a grant funding assistant division. So EMS grants help, police grants help, fire rescue grants help, and then the online training like EMS One Academy, and then there's also a policy division that generally is working with law enforcement around department policies, and then
Oh, that's cool.
accreditation. So a variety of things, all public safety related. Uh,
That's cool.
across the company. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what I like to do, just so listeners know that every once in a while, I like to just reach out to people that I've interacted with over the years. I don't like to lose touch with people, so I reach out to a lot of the
Yeah.
EMS educators and influencers that are out there, and um, sometimes the emails are not fresh, so they come back to me, and I'm like, oh, well, I guess that's it for that person.
Uh-huh.
But I always like reaching out and just to see what people are up to,
Yeah.
and is any way I can help them get exposure to what they're doing, and or maybe bring light to the EMS profession of stuff that they might be doing that might be interesting to other EMS providers out there. And you had mentioned in an email when you replied to me about the EMS Trend Report, and I
Yeah.
put a link in the notes here in the
Great.
comments. If
Thanks.
you're on YouTube watching it or Facebook, you'll see the link there. You can go and get a copy of that report. It's about a 30 somewhat page
Mm.
report where they talk about a lot of the things that are concerning or that are people in the industry, and they take sort of votes and uh, surveys on what EMS wants to see, going forward. Um, so that was something I thought. I mean, we talk a lot about that on the podcast when I'm on with Josh and Dave and whatnot. We actually just on talk about the National Registry issue and their
Oh, yeah.
proposal to sort of lessen the need for the accreditation component. We talked about that a little bit, and that's a hard subject to kind of wrap your head around too, because there's so many ways of coming at that. And one thing that Josh had mentioned during the show was about retaining the providers that are in your agency already. They've got the experience, they're bringing a lot to the table because they've been in EMS for a while, they've been with your agency for a while.
Right.
And it's interesting to me when I looked at the report that one of the more critical issues that they say, and when they took this sort of survey, was that retention of quality personnel was like one of the big things. That's
Yeah.
actually, when I looked at the report, it was like the past 3 years, that was like the number one thing.
Yeah.
So, why do you think that is like the biggest concern? Is it a concern, you think, for leadership, or is it a concern for the, like, I guess, the overall provider population who want to see, the experienced people out there to kind of help the new people come in and be good EMS providers?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, Jim, and maybe briefly about what the EMS Trend Report is. So this is
Sure.
the seventh year we've collaborated with Fitch and Associates, the EMS survey team, and also National EMS Managers Association to sort of measure the state of the industry and what paramedics want. And this year we had more than 3,000 respondents to the survey, and we explored a bunch of different issues related to the profession, including leadership and what people think of their direct supervisor. We've been asking for several years a question, asking respondents to rank the most critical issues facing the profession. And I think we've had about 10 of those each year, and then they just number them from 1 to 10. And like you said, retention of quality providers has showed up as the number one issue for I think 3 or 4 years in a row, which our respondent pool, usually about half the people we hear from are people that are working in the field, either as a EMT, paramedic, or maybe ground critical care or flight critical care. So field providers. And I think the premise of your question, though, is like, who does this matter to? Who does retention matter to? It matters to everybody. Certainly for providers, as you and the listeners know, if you have an agency with high turnover, it's hard to build a culture, for starters, other than a
Sure.
culture of high turnover. Quality of care probably suffers. You don't get relationships. You don't get people that are able to advance. When people leave, they take with them, institutional knowledge, but also there's still seats to fill that you got to put ambulances on the street. So, retention impacts staffing and people getting either held over, mandated to work additional shifts, sort of pressured or encouraged to work overtime. And then, of course, there's budget implications to
Yeah, I
that.
was going to say that that's a big one too, is that you got the cost to agencies whenever they have to keep onboarding
Right,
more and more people, and paying 3 people to be on a bus when people are doing their ride-alongs,
right.
all that stuff, that all uniforms, everything, that can be a big expense. And depending on how big the agency is, it can be pretty costly,
Right.
for them. And you had mentioned, some of the things about keeping trucks on the road and, you know, overtime staffing and things like that, that becomes an issue too. And I noted that was something that in the report where it was mentioned about the mental health of providers and that issue of burnout that you
Right.
hear so, much, about when you talk about, EMS and you get, and I think, let me see if I can find it here. They say that there's about 60% of people that they surveyed that report having at least one symptom of being burnt out,
Right.
and then there's 9% who feel they're completely burnt out. And I think, there is, agencies have things in place to try to help people through that. And I wonder how many people actually take advantage of it. I'll be honest with you, I was in
Yeah.
EMS maybe almost 20 years before I even found out about something like EAP
Right.
that's there to kind of help, providers through some of that stuff.
Yeah.
And then once I realized that, I found people taking advantage of something like that, and I really helps them through, burnout and the some of the mental things that go on and people
Right.
struggle with in EMS.
Yeah. The question about burnout is pretty interesting in that I don't have any way to confirm that, but it's my intuition is that that's probably a undercount of the actual number of people or percentage of people in EMS that are burnt out. Because if you're really fried on EMS, I think it's less likely that you're reading EMS One or following us on
Yeah,
Facebook or listening to the EMS Office Hours
that's
podcast,
true.
and then you're less likely to spend, say, 10 or 15 minutes filling out the EMS Trend Report. So, the fact that people that are at least engaged enough in the profession to take the survey, we've had 9% of them saying completely burned out, as quite worrisome. And I think it's to think about burnout on a continuum of like no burnout to completely burned out. And if you have one or more symptoms of burnout, like the next step on the continuum is more burnout, or going the other way back to no burnout. And the I think in the last probably like 5 years, maybe even more, we've seen a lot of agencies throw a lot of different things against the wall to see what's going to work. Um, and to just make people happier and healthier,
Hmm.
in terms of reducing burnout and staying engaged in the work. I think the pandemic certainly has to have complicated those efforts, as well as just the staffing challenge that so many agencies are facing right now and over the last couple of years. I don't think we have a good sense of um, what works best, or or for people to prioritize, like if we could have one thing, we want it to be a therapy dog, or no, what we really want is really good EAP,
Hmm.
or the thing that would really matter would be free lunch. Like there's all sorts of different things, and probably different people need different things. One of the things that we really dug into this year is trying to get a sense of people's relationship with their direct supervisor.
Hmm.
Because in a lot of workplaces, if you have a good if if you have a good relationship with your direct supervisor, and you feel like you have a leader that cares about you, and is doing things to help you and make the workplace better, that can really increase satisfaction. People don't quit jobs; they quit bad leaders. Um,
Yeah.
and I think we found some pretty interesting stuff this year around how people perceive their direct supervisor.
As it's we're talking again about the recruitment and the retention thing. Some of the reasons that were listed for people not staying at a job or staying in EMS, one of it was because of poor leadership was one of the factors that
Yeah.
influenced them, um, to stay in EMS. But there's a large part too, that maybe about half, that they say it didn't really have that much of an impact, um, on them as far as what they did. But there are other things that were listed, like of course compensation, which is always a big one. What people are getting paid, what benefits they're getting as a provider. Mental health, like we just talked about, is something as well. But even mental health, like you said, a lot of people that are on really leaning more towards where they're really burnt out aren't really watching a lot of these or listening to a lot of podcasts,
Hmm.
not looking at EMS1, .com. They're not reading a lot of blogs and stuff like that. So when you do look at that sort of part of the survey with the mental health, where it's maybe, what is it, about 19% of the people say it's a major issue, that it does
Hmm.
affect retention, but only 19% say it's a major issue. And like you said, I think maybe that's because of the fact that a lot of people that are really leaning more towards that burnt out factor aren't really engaging in this type of stuff, you
Yeah.
know. Um, and that goes with, I think, too, with when we were talking about the National Registry thing the other day. I had mentioned about things like the like coamps and stuff like that. When you look at their Facebook page and their Twitter page, they don't really have a lot of followers in relation to the importance they play within EMS as a whole.
Sure.
And is that because people don't really engage enough at that level of EMS? They're kind of worried about getting through the shift and getting maybe a better job, not doing the
Hmm.
overtime, not getting mandated, stuff like that. So I find it interesting, a lot of this stuff here. Josh is with us, Greg. Let me let him
Yeah.
jump in and get his point of view too, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I don't mind.
Hey,
Another
Greg.
blast from the past. Hey,
Yeah.
Josh. Good
How
to
you
see
doing?
and hear you again.
Yeah, sorry I was late. I'm local at my place in Pennsylvania, and I just found out that they're building a 1 million square foot warehouse down the block.
Oh, wow.
So me and the neighbors, so we're right now in a tizzy trying to get that not to happen.
Okay.
So, Greg, one thing I want to ask you something too,
Yeah.
and I'm sure Josh can probably chime in on this too. That looking at the critical issues that we talked about before about how retention and stuff was number
Right.
one 3 years in a row, but we talked a little bit about the provider mental health, and it seemed like that was number two last year,
Right.
and then it dropped down a little bit, this year. And I'm wondering, is that because it just went away, or do you think it just hasn't been sort of out there in the public eye as much? So we had the Code Green campaign was very big, I think, last year. A lot of push with that, a lot of attention to that, and maybe that's dropped off a little bit. And do you think that's why now funding and reimbursement seems to be more of a higher, issue?
Yeah. So I think some of it's the respondent pool, right? That it's a convenient sample. So anyone that wants to take the trend report survey can take it. So, from year to year, it's not the same people. So it could be just that the respondent pool changed and the things that are important to them is different than last year's pool of respondents. I think to get back at those like critical issues and things that are affecting retention, certainly pay and compensation is a big issue. And then, as you mentioned, poor leadership, it also ranked high as a big issue affecting retention. If somebody's listening to this and they're a field supervisor or a, top manager or a owner of an EMS agency, they can be, I want them to be working to increase compensation and change Medicare reimbursement and joining other advocacy efforts that will bring up funding for EMS. But that's like long term, that's going to take months and years to bring more money into EMS. The thing they can start doing today and tomorrow is improving their leadership skills. And we're talking about those people that are pretty burnt out and likely not engaging with the larger EMS profession. By virtue of just being on the job, though, they're engaging with a leader, a supervisor of some sort, and that leader can be making an impact on that provider's day, week, month, year, career, and
I agree with
just
that.
being available to them, listening to them, giving them feedback that's meaningful and impactful, just being present in a way that I think, it was certainly a glass half full, half empty as we looked at some of these questions, like when thinking about your direct supervisor of like, oh, great, we got about half the people saying my supervisor treats everyone fairly, and half the people saying, my supervisor values my input and perspective. But then the glass is empty, thinking like, oh, we got half the people saying my supervisor doesn't value my input or my supervisor doesn't help me learn from my mistakes. And that's something like you're like turn a switch as a field supervisor, get a little bit of training to learn how to better give feedback and start giving people feedback. And that's going to make a difference in that person's satisfaction and potentially their retention in the career field.
Any thoughts, Josh?
There's a lot to unpack there because there's multiple ways to look at it. I'm not sure that I'm not sure, Greg, that the sample that you're taking is very much different. I'm thinking that the people who look at these sort of articles and stuff are EMS that has sort of grown up on this. I think there's a big disconnect in nowadays, because you talk about EMS one, or you talk about some of the other EMS publications. Those were the ones that we used to get in hard copy and leave in the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how people, or the crew room, and that's how people got to see them. Nowadays, so we're where I'm going with that is we're dealing with a smaller subset of applicants to that to the God.
I was just thinking the pool of people responding to a survey like this.
Yes, the survey. Yeah. I was getting stuck on that. I've been, I'm sorry. This thing has really taken my time and my sleep. So you have a smaller subset that are responding to the survey, and they're responding in a way that it could be we don't know the size of the groups that they're in. Like my organization, we have over 500 EMS in that EMS group. There are others that, just go a few miles away, and you're lucky if you have 20.
Right. Yeah. We do look at the demographics of the respondents each year, and we've stayed fairly consistent in that, we see a mix of people from, say, suburban, rural, urban, and different types of services, whether they're fire-based or nonprofit or hospital-based. Like, we see similar year over year. One of the things that's always been a concern is the age of our respondent pool. This year, 28% of respondents had been in EMS for more than 30 years, and another 25%, 21 to 30 years. So,
50%.
Yeah,
have been in long enough to see a printed version of the survey that you're giving out. Right.
Yeah, and so we all know that as you look at the people sitting in trucks, 50% of people that are riding in ambulances across the country are not 50 years and up.
Correct.
There's a lot of young people, and I think
so
getting
to interrupt here.
Yeah.
Did you do any cross correlation with the type of answers? Yes, I'm being heard by my management. Yes, my management takes me in. I'm being treated fairly. They take in my considerations. And to age?
So we didn't do that. We have the data available. Each year we face a problem of we ask more questions and gather more data than we can report back in a written report, a presentation at Pinnacle, and podcasts. The questions about their relationship with direct supervisors, we did only ask those questions of people that indicated they were a field provider. So if somebody said they were a chief of their organization, we didn't ask them questions about their direct supervisor, who might be like the mayor or city council or stockholders or something. So we do have that piece of only field providers, but I agree, it would be interesting to ask the questions or sort the data by years of experience. I've got one though that we did sort by. I'm just scrolling on a screen here. We asked a question asking people to recommend a career in EMS. And so for many years, we've asked a yes/no question. Would you recommend a career in EMS? And each year we get sort of 40 to 60% of people recommend, which on its face isn't very great, right? Because that means about half the people working in EMS wouldn't recommend EMS, which is of course concerning. So this year we used the Net Promoter Scale. Would you recommend a career in EMS? 0 to 10, not at all likely to extremely likely. You get asked this question, like if you fly JetBlue, you might get an email like, would you recommend JetBlue to your friends and family? Or you stay in a Hilton, they say, would you recommend Hilton? Or so for recommend a career in EMS, we only asked this of people that indicated that they were career providers. So 19% of them either chose a 9 or a 10. So on the net promoter score, you only look at, you subtract your detractors from your promoters. So promoters are 9 and 10, and detractors are 0 to 7, and you don't, or 0 to 6, and you don't include 7 and 8. So 9s and 10s and 0 through 6. So the net promoter score for career EMS was minus 31. Now, keep in mind all the organizations we don't like, our health insurance providers, our cable company, our airlines, they usually get a net promoter score of like 15 or 20%. So to be minus 31 is pretty bad space to be in. When we asked volunteers, people that indicated their volunteer EMS, their NPS was 9, which is quite a bit better than minus 31. And we had 36%, so more than a third of that volunteer respondent pool said, yeah, they would recommend volunteering in EMS, which partly I think points to two totally different populations we should be thinking about as we think about the profession and what the issues and challenges are in the profession. There's still this sizable volunteer component, and then also the people that are working in EMS for a paycheck.
So one of those topics that have come across podcasters' desks, and I know for a fact, Greg, that it's come across yours, is this whole concept of paid versus volley.
Yeah.
And, what does that do to us as a profession when we're trying to take those standards that are generally considered a part of the paid world? Because, while we're paying you, therefore we have a higher standard. We have ownership across the board, up and including the management of whatever organization we work for.
Right.
So when you have that level of ownership, it tends to be pushed down as the goals downward, in terms of what is our response time between jobs? How are we treating the patient? So the patient's coming in and they're taking their pre-hospital survey. Are you happy with coming into this hospital? Did the people who brought you there treat you well? And all those standards get pushed up. Where in a volunteer world, they're either not addressed or even pushed down, because the volunteer world, and in some cases, you get more willing participants. We go out in the paid world, and you're not including those times of the overall things that add to your job enjoyment when you go out, that you've just been docked by your supervisor because you've been late the third time that week.
Yeah.
Or those other job related things that you'll never see in the volunteer world. And that's got to have a large effect on how we look at ourselves, sort of from behind the scenes.
So I know there's some really high performing volunteer organizations. They've got plenty of volunteers. They got great equipment. They provide outstanding patient care. And then we also know that there's paid services that are great, but also paid services that are struggling with personnel and have poor equipment and poor patient care. I think each community needs to continue to look at what's the right solution for our community, and keeping alive a struggling model of EMS, whether it's a county service that's got paid staff or a hospital-based or a volunteer service. They got to be thinking about what do we put our resources into. The hypothetical that I've used for many years is if you have a volunteer agency and you have 5 people left in your volunteer agency, what's the best use of your time? Is it to put all your time and energy into recruiting one more person and getting them through EMT school? Or is it going to your community and saying, with our remaining energy, we're going to help you figure out what comes next, because we're not going to be sustainable at 5 or 6 or 7. So maybe the best use of our remaining time and energy is dissolving this thing and putting it into some other model. Just like if you have a county service that's struggling to meet payroll, you got to go to the county board at some point and be like, this isn't sustainable. You know, a little bit more money isn't going to solve this. You know, it's time for us to look at some new model and put our energy there.
Yeah, that's
So
what
where's
happened the place I was working at. That's the last place that I worked at. That's when it happened. It was paid. We thought everything was going great. It was a great job, and we were doing great patient care. But the agency just couldn't afford to keep the ambulance end of it anymore, and they gave it to the city agency.
See, this is the thing that makes me nuts, is the idea that the local agencies can't afford these services. Meanwhile, we're increasing the budget of police and fire, or even sanitation, or even street decorations, before we recognize that EMS is a profession on its own. They should be paid in line with that idea, and the room for volunteers. Where is that discussion to tear down that model, Greg, and replace it with one that is more conducive to having a professional service out there with some room? I've never understood why we can't have some room for volunteers, but keep it, volunteers should be kept in that category of starting out, wanting to gain some experience, and, doing it on an extremely part-time basis.
Yeah, I think each community has to decide. I mean, that's the situation that's the governance model, if you will, for EMS, is that, very few states are mandating a certain model. And so each community's got to decide. And, there's 50 plus 60 years of different models in different places, right. And unwinding one thing and winding up another thing is really difficult. What we're trying each year to do with the trend report is look at some of the specific challenges facing the career field or the profession or EMS, however broadly you want to define it. And we want people from all types of services to participate, because there are issues that span service models, and right. and see how they're experiencing different types of services.
Yeah, I mean, the frustration that you can hear from me at this point is the lesson that I'm learning in the community idea of, so for this stupid warehouse, we're dealing with a planning commission. The planning commission is volunteer townspeople. Some of them get paid to be on the planning board, but their mission statement on the planning board is to look out for things that are non-productive for the community, that don't support the community's well-being and welfare.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, when you look at the facts of what they pass along and what they just scoot along, as another agenda item, they're certainly not doing that. And to sort of take a component of that and put it onto EMS for these smaller communities, especially, I think we need to, as a profession, push down to our people to say, if you're in a small community and you're being treated this way, you don't have adequate EMS services, it's up to you to put on, as a provider, to put on that community hat and go to those meetings and make those arguments, because otherwise I can absolutely guarantee you they don't know you exist.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case in a lot of places, which is unfortunate. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I was going to say, you read this report, Greg, and I encourage people that are listening, whether you're listening to it right now live or you come across it, 3-4 months from now is to go and get a copy of this report and read it. I think it's very insightful, to see some of the percentages of things and where the respondents, seem to think things are more important than others. I don't know. This is something that even with EMS officer, we've talked about many times. We never really solved the problems here on this show. We're just trying to give a voice and to point these things out so that hopefully the listeners go out and do their own investigations, their own research, and then kind of take this information to their agency or even to their partner to start saying, what can we do, even just you and I and together, to start improving things for ourselves, for the agency, for the patients we're taking care of, our mental health. How do we keep these people that we know that are in our agency that have been here for 10 years? I heard, Johnny is looking to go be a nurse, or he's looking to go work at Home Depot because it's less stressful and more money. How do we keep him here? What is that we can do, to make that happen? One thing I will tell you, that the one of the places I worked, I was doing a lot of social media stuff and posting a lot of memes, and a lot of the memes were very motivational in their theme as far as what was going on in EMS and stuff. And I had the chief of the department come and talk to me and tell me that he just loved the fact that I was doing that, because he felt that it was kind of running, kind of trickling down to the other members in the department that knew it was me posting it, and they were kind of getting another look at what they were doing in the agency, what they were doing for themselves, and this is why I think it's important that people go, they download something like this, they read it, and again, see where they can implement some of the things in their own agency, whether it's for, the agency as a whole or just for them and their partner.
Yeah. I can, you said you wanted a solution. I can wrap up with a solution that people can start doing immediately. So we asked the respondents, what are traits you value most in a leader? And there was 3 runaway, most top of the list: honesty, integrity, and transparency.
Yeah.
So certainly, if you're a leader in EMS, act with those 3 things. It will be valued and appreciated. And then the specific action, anyone that's in a leadership position where you're supervising other people, you need to become a student of one-on-one meetings. What makes a good one-on-one meeting? What kind of things should you cover? How should you run a one-on-one meeting? And immediately start scheduling and holding one-on-one meetings with the people you supervise, where you can listen to them, learn about those people you supervise, give them feedback about their performance, help them learn from their mistakes, and hear out their ideas, and then come back to them and say, I heard your idea, and maybe we weren't able to do anything with this idea, but I want to continue hearing your ideas. A lot of times people just want to share input. They don't necessarily believe that it's actually going to happen or even need it to happen. But if you want, here's a solution. If you want to reduce burnout, improve retention, improve job satisfaction, hold meaningful, regular one-on-one meetings with the people you supervise.
Yeah, that's a good tip, Greg. I'll tell you, I listened to a business podcast, and the guy talks about a lot about that, about having the one-on-one meeting with people, especially sometimes the newer people that are coming into an agency that think they can, they have all the answers to everything. But you as the leader have to sit down with them and like you said, maybe it's something they haven't seen or thought through, but you as the leader or the manager for the agency, you've heard this numerous times, and you can explain why it is that that's not the way you do something, or why that's not a good idea. And then that will kind of sometimes cut off that negativity that somebody might have or start to have when they come into an agency to start seeing things that could be done better. You know what I mean? So definitely, like you said, that whole thing of being transparent, and I know communication was one of the elements too. That's a very big thing when people want to see with their leadership as well. So I'm going to end it there, guys. I don't want to go get too much. I'll tell you, we can pretty much break down this report page by page and spend a good, 20, 30 minutes on each individual page and really break it down. So, but I think we covered some of the highlights, Greg, and I think I'm hoping it's enough to entice people to go and grab this report, read it, and see, where they fit in and what the people that answered. Maybe your thought process is exactly the same as a lot of the people that actually took the survey. So I think even if at that level, it would be informational for people to take advantage of.
Jim, I don't want to be a negative Nancy here.
Oh.
And Greg, certainly, I know I have the penchants for that. But I'm really, this local thing has really opened my eyes to how local government works.
Right.
And I'm really wondering if we shouldn't, in some of our EMS articles and how we communicate to, sort of the body of EMS professionals, is to sort of take on this role of social responsibility. Because, we could have all the conversations we want with our direct manager and be real good friends with them and get high marks and have all of that fantastic relationship. But if his hands are tied by disconnected management, then, the best manager in the world isn't going to be able to retain motivated people in the field without having the tools provided to them. And those tools aren't going to be provided to them unless we can, as a group, open a dialogue with sort of the decision makers in our organizations.
Yeah, the need for advocacy by both organizations and the people that work in those organizations to advocate for EMS is as significant as it's ever been. And, I regularly encourage people to join their state and national professional associations. I just this week renewed my Wisconsin EMS Association and National Association of EMTs memberships because I believe in and want to support the advocacy that they do for the profession. Is it always perfect or exactly what I think we should be doing? No, but it's something, and some of it, matters to the three of us and other people in the profession. And, so those state and national organizations are important. And then I agree with you, Josh. It's also making sure your voice is heard locally, so decision makers are aware of EMS and like what Jim was doing, even just knowing the challenges and the rewards of the profession are important as well. Guys, I actually got to go.
Okay, thank you, Greg.
To reconnect with you both, and I think we've been at least 5 years since we last did this, so I hope we don't have to wait another 5 years to visit with one another again. So thank you so much.
All right, Greg. Thanks a lot.
Stay safe.
All right, bye-bye.
All right. All right, Josh, we'll wind it up there, man. Thanks for popping in.
Sorry about the delay.
It was good to have another voice and another point of view, joining us. So, all right, everybody, that's it. As always, I am Jim Hoffman.
And I'm Josh Knapp.
Stay safe. Stay extra safe because